Hey, well, welcome to Warfighters in Action. I'm Larry Stutzry. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Air and Space Forces Association. And this is a special day you're all a part of. We have our first live audience for Warfighters in Action, and we've got a large audience online listening also. We're broadcasting from Pentagon Row. That's in Arlington, Virginia. We're just across the street from the Pentagon. Now, before we get started, I want to give a deep, heartfelt thanks to our industry sponsors who make Warfighters in Action a reality, and they're on the boards behind me. You can take a look at that. But I also want to give them a heartfelt thanks because they directly support our nation's guardians and airmen. So with that, let's get started. I'd like to welcome Colonel Nick Hague. He's a distinguished and decorated NASA astronaut, but also equally important, he is a guardian, a Space Force guardian, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go further into the discussion. Now, he's logged over a year in space, and that is crazy. I think the exact number of days is 374.
If you're counting.
If you're counting. I'm sure he was. He's an Academy grad. He hails from Kansas and is just a fantastic American. So welcome, Colonel Hague.
Thank you, sir.
And I have to tell you, you've done a lot for us. We've got your coveralls that you provided to us from a mission on display near the entrance. So I would ask the audience here on your way out, make sure you take a look at that. It's pretty impressive. So let's get to it.
Sounds good, sir.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk out of sequence a little bit, but your last mission was in space last fall in September, and you commanded the SpaceX Crew 9 mission from launch from Cape Canaveral. Have you had time to reflect on the significance of what happened on that day?
There's nothing but time when you're floating around the Earth and inside the station. So, you try to process what's happening in the moment. You're just really responding, and your mission pivots. This is your new objective, and everything is focused on making sure that you can accomplish that mission successfully. One thing that is like a glaring thing that I took away from just the lead up to the launch itself was watching my crewmates. So for the better part of 18 months, I'd been training side by side with a crew of four, Zena Cardman, Stephanie Wilson, Alex Gorbanoff. And when we had to adjust in order to create the space to be able to bring back Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, two of the crewmates had to be pulled off of that. And so you can imagine, Stephanie has flown to space multiple times before. She'd been to the space station. This was Zena's first flight. The buildup, the bonds, the friendship, the camaraderie that we had developed over those 18 months, and then in a moment to have that torn apart. And then to watch the professionalism of Zena and Stephanie to just jump right in, because we haven't ever operated a Dragon like we did with two people. So if you think back to Demo 2, Bob and Doug flew up as a commander and pilot. They trained as a two-person crew the entire time. This time around, Alex had trained as a mission specialist, had never sat behind the displays before. He was in Russia when the decision was made, had no time to do any kind of Delta training to be brought up to the level of a pilot. And so we launched with one person qualified to fly the spacecraft. And so then it's a matter of how do I figure out the crew resource management to do that. And Zena and Stephanie were instrumental in that. So decisions made on Friday, you're pulled off the mission. On Monday, we're in the sims together. They're there with me, helping me think through all the things that I need to think through. We spent an entire week sorting that out, how to operate as a two-person crew. And then we all flew out to Hawthorne at SpaceX. And then we worked with Alex because he was finally able to get back from Russia, and we figured out, okay, how do we make this work? And then we even threw in surrogates that had no training in the Dragon to simulate Butch and Sonny. Yeah. And okay, how do you do that and go through emergency procedures? And so with 2 weeks of intense Delta training, we were able to respond to that. So the professionalism of the astronaut corps, I think, is the U.S. astronaut corps, but just the astronaut community in general, it was just on display and impressed me so much.
Yeah.
But it has to be, because spaceflight is so dynamic, and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And if you look at my spaceflight history, I mean, everything is a surprise. It's full of ups and downs.
How do you prepare? I mean, you talk about the professionalism, but do you train for this kind of last minute chaos? Has to get organized and go.
Some of it's expectations. You train for the nominal about 5% of the time, and then you spend 95% of the time training for everything that's going to go wrong. And so that's kind of how you approach most problems. And surprising, when you're sitting on the launch pad and the T-10 is counting down, what's going through your mind is, okay, what's the next thing that I'm going to have to respond to in an emergency situation? So as you're spending the 9 minutes going to space, there's moments where you're appreciating the ride, and then the rest of the time you're just thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that if anything goes wrong, I'm okay, my crew's okay, and we can continue the mission.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's go back. So 2018, your first launch.
Yeah.
You're on the Soyuz a rocket, and things are going fine. And then there's, I guess, the booster collides with the main body.
Yeah.
And the system automatically aborts the mission. Talk us through that. You end up safely in Kazakhstan, but
yeah,
how was that?
So to context, Soyuz capsule, much smaller than a Dragon. I'm elbow to elbow with my commander, Alexei Ovchinin, who's a veteran space flyer. He's done a mission to the space station before. He's flown on the Soyuz, and so the two of us are going up, and it's my first experience. I really don't know what to expect. And I'm strapped in, and, we lift off, and, from him saying, Payahali, which is, hey, we're going. And, that's the word.
Is that what that really means?
Yeah, we're on our way.
I just
Let's go. And, that's what Gagarin said when he launched. And so they're steeped in tradition. And so you're part of that tradition. But he's talking to me the whole way up, hey, this is normal. Oh, we can feel the vibrations. Everything's good. And then we get to that first stage where we're going to drop those external tanks. They're supposed to propel themselves away, releasing some of their pressure and gas. One of them doesn't do that. And so when you're going 4,000 miles an hour, the slipstream's pretty strong. And so it slammed that external tank back into the core stage, kind of impaled it. But as it did, it tilted us enough that the automatic escape system sensed it's time to get off. And so some solid rocket motors inside of the fairing, because our launch escape tower had already separated at that time, pulled us off to the side. All of that happened in a split second. And so what I'm trying to process is, you hear the ka-chunks of the normal separation, and then all of a sudden there's this violent side shake, and a light's flashing and the alarm's going off, and then there's one little red thing that says rocket failure, and then you're kind of tumbling. And so we were pointing pretty much straight up. And so we continue from about the 30-mile mark to up to just over 50 miles, just coasting up to the edge of space. And I remember looking out the window and going, I guess I'm not going to make it to the station today.
Yeah.
And then we come back down. And, at that point, everything's fairly normal, except for the G-forces we feel, because we're on a little steeper trajectory. And the chutes open up. And, throughout that whole time, your mind does crazy stuff to you. Time dilation is a real thing. Yeah. It seemed like we were weightless for all of a couple seconds, but it was actually 4 minutes. Things just go by so quick. Thankfully, we had a GoPro inside that was recording all of it. And so I was able to go back and watch it and relive it a little bit.
Oh, wow.
But you jump into your procedures, the training, all the training for what goes wrong. We had simulated that type of failure, kind of an in-flight rocket failure, about 8 months before. It was one of our sim cases that we did in Star City, just outside Moscow. So we had gone through and done the procedure, and so instantly you're in the procedure. What do I need to do in order to maximize my chance for getting back home to the family?
Yeah.
And making sure Alexei gets back home to his family.
Yeah. Well, it was a successful abort, a safe landing, and they picked you up pretty quickly.
Yeah. The Soyuz has it's a controlled impact with the ground, but it's more like a slow speed car wreck going about 30 miles an hour. You're under a big chute, it comes down, there's rockets that fire to slow you down a little bit more, and then you bounce off the ground, and we ended up on our side. All the time that we were under the parachute, we were talking to the search and rescue forces. So the Russians stationed them all along our ground track, all the way from the Baikonur Cosmodrome to the Sea of Japan. And so there was fixed wing asset that as soon as we had aborted, they were launching. We reported down the time. And so it's not complicated math. They just said, well, this is when you aborted, this is how fast you were going, and this was the angle. That's where you're going to land. And so they just started sending people to that point. So within about 10 minutes, there were some pararescue jumpers that had dropped in and pulled us out of the capsule. And, it's at that point when you're sitting on the parachutes that the emotion of the situation, you can feel the shock just kind of wash over you.
Yeah. Now you touched space, but you didn't quite get there. Is that right?
People are really interested in how high you get when something like that happens. I thought it was less relevant than I was still alive.
Very good point. Very good point. About 5 months later, you had a successful launch. And got
5 months later. And, and I think that's, space flight is an example, but I think, service members understand this with all of their deployments. Many times the person that is in the action has less stress and less sacrifice than the loved ones that sit there on the ground.
Yes.
And so the first launch, my wife, my boys, my brothers, my parents, their wives, everybody's out in Baikonur to watch this. And so they witness all of that happening. The second time around, my wife, Katie, just went on her own, and everybody stayed back in mission control in Houston and got talked through it all. But when you're in the action, you've got some sense of control over your own fate. When you're not, when you're watching the person that you care about most sit on top of a rocket, there's nothing you can do except sit there and watch. And so the level of support that NASA puts into the whole person, recognizing that the psychological support, not just to the member, but also to the family, is critical. And so from the moment of 2 days later, I was back in Houston after the abort, to the 5 months before, there's obviously a lot of discussions that Katie and I are having, and we're having with the boys, but there's also, professional support that's provided by NASA to make sure that we're processing all of that stuff. And that's how you have that kind of resilience to try it again. Same launch pad, different rocket, same type of rocket, 5 months later.
Successful outcome.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to ask you a little different track here. About 2/3 of NASA astronauts are service members and you were on a mission. It might have been your last one. I'm not sure. You had an Annapolis grad, you had a West Point grad, and you, Academy grad. So just a general question about what's that balance about, that you have guardians also at NASA, you have other service members also at NASA?
Yeah. So the way that the astronauts are selected, there's no quota. There's no, we need to have so many military astronauts. It's an application process that's open to any U.S. citizen that has an advanced degree. You have to have a master's in a STEM field and a couple years of work experience, and you can apply. So different than the origins of the space program where we were, targeting the military population. Now and for a long time, it's been open to anybody. So I think it's a reflection of the experience and the investment that the service makes into developing their service members to have, you can be really technically smart, and that's absolutely a part of the job. But the thing that really is the defining thing that helps you get selected and makes you successful at being an astronaut is how you deal with people. And it's not just leading people, but it's just all those soft skills of how well can you take care of yourself? How well can you take care of your teammate? How do you handle adversity? How do you adapt to situations? Those things, we invest heavily in making sure that service members have those skills. And so then that makes them very attractive to NASA.
Yeah. And you have the international aspect of that also. That adds a layer of complexity, I would think.
Yeah. And then you also, for better or worse, we have opportunities in our careers to demonstrate those skills in stressful situations. And so, if I'm an employer, I'm looking for somebody that's done something close to what I'm going to ask them to do to try to buy down risk because I know how they're going to behave in that situation. And military members have that opportunity. Not to say that civilians don't have that opportunity. It's just different.
Yeah. So on your mission, when you had a West Pointer, an Annapolis, and a U.S. Air Force Academy grad, was there service rivalry? Did you guys teach each other, or are you just one team, one fight?
At the end of the day, it's one team, one fight. But I was up there for 6 months with Butch and Sonny, and they're both naval aviators, and I never heard the end of it. So
I can imagine. Well, you're one of two Guardians that have been in space, okay? And we know that there are Guardians all across the planet that are working very hard to maintain the safety and success of not just NASA, but other spacefaring organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the bottom line is that NASA can't do its mission unless the Space Force and those Guardians are doing their mission. So I've got a video here, and I'll kind of lead into it. So I'm not going to give a quiz on the geography, but this is the west coast of the United States. There's Edwards Air Force Base. And so the biggest thing that I've noticed, and it's the key example, and so in the next frame, you're going to see this nice aurora, but I don't want you to look at the aurora. I want you to look at the stars. And then in the lower right-hand corner, and it may show up on the side, I don't know if it shows up there, you see these stars that are kind of dancing around like fireflies. Well, those aren't stars, those are satellites. And so you get this front row view of all of these satellites reflecting, glinting the sun's rays as we're getting ready to come over the sunrise. And you realize that it is congested up there. And so that's a very tangible demonstration of why NASA needs Guardians doing their job. We have a direct line from Mission Control out to Vandenberg. They're constantly tracking those 48,000 objects up there. And when something comes too close, they let us know. And if it continues to look like it's a problem, then we move out of the way. And my first mission up there, I didn't see this. So 6 years ago, you couldn't see that kind of, I never saw that.
Yeah.
So in 6 years, we went from open skies and you really never saw another satellite to now there's hundreds that dance in front of you every time you get ready to come to sunrise, which happens 16 times a day.
Yeah.
And so just this constant reminder of what they're doing to make sure that we stay safe.
Wow, that's great. So part of your work with NASA while in orbit, I've got some statistics here, especially from Crew 9. 900 hours of research, 150 science experiments. Those experiments included everything from growing plants to testing stem cell technology. It's fascinating how much work is done. And you were outside in space, walking, doing repairs and other technical exploration and tests out there. What stood out as the most exciting science piece or technology piece that you worked on?
I get that question a lot. Like, what was your favorite experiment? And it's really hard to point to one because they're so different. And each one, could have such a dramatic impact to life on the ground. But that's why we're up there. We're up there to do scientific research on the station. The International Space Station is this laboratory that we've been inhabiting continually for 2.5 decades. And so we've built it, and now we're really starting to exploit its scientific capabilities. We're doing, up there doing DNA sequencing, trying to identify different microbes that we're able to sample off the station to prove that technology is useful. So pharmaceutical companies might want to do that, or stem cell research, trying to understand, are these stem cells more viable or more useful because they are cultivated in a weightless environment versus on the ground and subject to the pressures of gravity. Some of the ones that are the ones that stick with you the most are the ones where you raise your hand and say, I'm going to be the guinea pig and you can do your experiments on me. And so there's about a dozen of those, everything from, giving a little blood and then analyzing all that blood to see what's happened to my immune system while I've been on orbit, because we know that life on orbit depresses your immune system response. And we're trying to figure out why. Yeah. Others where we're trying to come up with countermeasures for all that working out that we do up there. Yeah. The equipment that we use is really big. And as we go further into space, as we go back to the moon, onto Mars, volume and mass are important. So how do I get rid of some of those really bulky experiments? So hooking myself up to, electrode pads and shocking muscles and trying to use that to stimulate muscles and bone growth. Those are the ones that are the most tangible, but there's so many up there, it's hard to pick one.
Yeah. It's amazing how advanced that type of research has become in the use of space in that environment.
Some of it is just like, it's science fiction.
Yeah.
One of the last things I did up there is I was working on cleaning one of our 3D printers. And it was a printer that I installed 6 years ago. It's the biofabrication facility. It prints human tissue. And so you help install it, you do some test runs on it, and then in the subsequent 6 years, they have printed cardiac muscle and knee meniscus with the idea that I can print it up on orbit. It's a more viable tissue than trying to 3D print it down here, with hopes that someday I'll print transplant organs and be able to send them down. Because on the ground, when I print with a 3D printer, the organ really isn't stable until it's whole. It needs to grow in microgravity. How do we simulate microgravity on the ground? At NASA, we go to the neutral buoyancy lab and we go underwater and we float. How do babies grow? Yeah. They float. Yeah. And so we're trying to simulate, okay, how do I build this? How do I help it grow when we float? And so that's the long-term goal.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, science fiction.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Paul Lockhart. He's a two-time Challenger astronaut. And he brought back a lot of video from his missions that were just fun. Bubbles of water being pushed through the weightless environment. Mm-hmm. And I've been at his house in other presentations where children just go nuts over this stuff. They're able to see this environment that is often just simulated, in movies and other things like that. But we'll talk a little bit more about STEM and some education in a second. But okay. I do want to get back to the families, because I think you've taught us something that we need to be thinking about the families, not just the astronauts. But, in our military careers, separation is a very difficult thing. And on the ground here, it is typically geographic in nature. Often communications can be iffy or non-existent. So there you are, 17,000 plus miles per hour going around the planet. How do you stay in touch? And what are the tricks? I mean, are there things that are better than other things?
Some of it gets easier with experience. In terms of the tricks, over the years, learning that constant communication, Katie and I I'd wake up every morning and send her an email, and just it was just a let it all out. Hey, here's what's going on today. Here's something cool that happened that surprised me about space. And then, hey, here's where I'm at emotionally and all the things that are going on. And so we'd have that and kind of prime a phone call. And we're spoiled in low Earth orbit because we've got a communications network above us, the TDRS system, that provides us with KU comm coverage about 95% of the time, which gives me the opportunity to make an IP phone call or to do a video call pretty much anytime I want. And so the communication, the connectivity is phenomenal. And so just that constant communication, but also realizing that, when you're separated like that, everybody's lives continue to move forward. And it's a choice to make sure that as you move forward, you don't move further apart, you move closer together. And then making sure that the support that you provide, the weekly medical conference that I would have where I'd get done with my flight docs and then they would call Katie and kind of give their reports and say, hey, these are the things that are going on. Or every 2 weeks we do a tag up with my psychologist and psychiatrist, and then they would do the same thing. And so the system is set up to give you to maximize the potential so that when you come back, reintegration's tough, but you're set up for success at the end of the day.
Yeah. Katie's a retired Air Force colonel, right?
She is. She is.
How did was that a help? Was that not a help that she had that background?
Yeah. I think ultimately it was a help. It made it difficult as we were going along. There were many times where she was deployed and I was home, or I was deployed and she was home. And so you have this shared perspective of, I know what's going on the other end. And so you are a little more in tune with that. But it also made it difficult because there was a lot of time apart. There were, we tried to be stationed together as much as possible, but given the nature of astronauts needing to stay in Houston, I got selected in 2013. So how do you spend 12 years in one location, but then still have a spouse that's able to move around? And so it's difficult to juggle.
Yeah. Yeah. How about staying in touch with your Guardian colleagues?
Yeah. So one of the, it was, the first time I was up there, I had this desire to try to reach out to people that were supporting us, but it seemed very difficult. So this predates the Space Force. Right. Yeah. So my first mission predated the Space Force, but this time, the Space Force, the existence of the Space Force made it easier for me to engage. And so one of the things I did is, every Wednesday or Thursday, I'd just randomly pick a unit or an ops floor and just cold call them. And hey, how's it going? I just want to say thanks. And, we're zipping around the earth and you're keeping us safe. How's it going on your end? And just chat. And some people wouldn't believe I was actually who I said I was. Other people were thrilled, and those were fun. Sometimes the comm coverage would let me talk for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and sometimes we could talk for 30 minutes. And those were fun times.
Yeah,
it definitely lifted my spirits. And I hope to do the same for them.
Sure. Hey, I'm Nick Hague. Send me some money. Is that So you also stayed in touch, by the way. I want to thank you for this on behalf of the association here. But you stayed in touch with us last fall while in orbit on the ISS. And you recorded a message for us that we showed in the big room at Air Space and Cyber Conference. We had 20,000 people in attendance. The room was packed, and it was a tremendous message that you sent down. And it was especially important for the Polaris awardees. That's for the audience. That's the top guardians in the Space Force. They were thrilled with that message. So really appreciate you doing that for us.
It's you just, when you're up there, you want to try to, I want to be able to say thank you. And I want to try to share the experience a little bit. And we do all kinds of outreach. Some of it's not high tech. Some of it's ham radio. And so we would do ham radio contacts on a kind of weekly basis. And that opened up parts of the world that didn't have access to, high bandwidth communications. And so we'd talk to classrooms around the globe
Oh,
and just
fantastic.
answer kids' questions.
Yeah,
It's a lot of
fantastic.
fun.
Well, the Space Force turned 5 years old while you're on the space station. And did you guys have a rocket celebration up there, or what did you guys celebrate?
Well, I forced the Navy guys to celebrate the Space Force birthday.
Good on you, as it should be.
We had cake, so that was
Okay,
great.
that's great.
It's fun, and you have to plan ahead when you're going up there. You got to bring your own party supplies, and that typically gets packed about 6 months in advance. But in my stuff, I'm able to take up little souvenirs and things like that, and I, quite a few of those were Space Force related. One that comes to mind is the sheet music for the Air Force, or the Space Force song.
Right. Semper Super.
And it was fun because I know there was so much work that went into, it's emblematic of so much work that's gone into the first 5 years, and in terms of establishing the space, what does it mean to be a Guardian? And the song is part of that, but it was also personally relevant because Katie, you mentioned, so she was there in the thick of it as the the director for public affairs for the Space Force, helping all that come together, and so it was fun to be able to celebrate that a little bit, have that memento.
Hey, so stick with this anniversary. Space Force will turn 6 this fall. What's your perspective on Space Force right now in the first 6 years, 5.5 years, I guess?
There's been so much progress, and it's moving quick, and it continues to evolve and move really quick. I was fortunate, I talked about trying to make assignments work out. I was fortunate to be able to do a developmental rotation when Katie got assigned to come back here to DC. I spent 2 years as the director of test and evaluation inside the Pentagon, as the Space Force is standing up, and just the progress that I've seen from some of the seeds that were laid in those early years, and that we've been as far surpassed my expectations. And I think sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you don't necessarily see it, but I go down to Houston and I get in this bubble and I'm focused on civil space and the NASA mission. And then I check back in after a year or, a little bit longer with my colleagues and on the TE side specifically, and hear about what they're doing, and it just blows me away. So I've been so impressed.
Yeah, we had our grand opening of this facility just recently, and General Saltzman gave opening comments for that. He is the right man in the right place, the right time to lead the Guardians and really influence all the services. But it sounds like, well, let's get back to, we were going to talk a little bit about youth and STEM, and Air and Space Forces Association has a STEM program, and we run 2 competitions for kids in high school and some middle school. Cyber Patriot, which is all about cyber. And then we have Stellar Explorers, which is a amazing space competition. And I got to judge that for the first time. I was blown away at what kids in high school can pick up in terms of the technology, vernacular, the physics. Pretty impressive.
No, so I agree with you. I was able to, down in Houston a couple of years ago, give a talk to the Stellar Explorers that were down there for the competition, and they blow you away.
It's fantastic. So you had some STEM initiatives that you did, I think, from ISS. Can you describe some of that? What were you trying to, achieve?
Well, ultimately, I'm just trying to get people to be curious. Get students to be curious about what's going on, and then hopefully let them understand a little bit about why we do the space station. Why does the space station exist at all? And that's where it gets into some of the, if you're talking to elementary students, the real young ones, kindergarten, first grade, just showing them water floating around in front of you. We're all kids when we're sitting there watching, and it's like watching a flame at a campfire at night. You just sit there and it mesmerizes you as it dances in front of you. But that's why we're there, because that's the only place I can do an experiment where I can let something float for years We go to great lengths and spend lots of money to be able to do, a drop tower test where we only get a second or two of time in weightlessness, or we do, parabolic flights where we get maybe 20 seconds of weightlessness. And this is a place where I can just take gravity out of the equation and see what's going on. And then you stick your finger into that water, and then the surface tension of the water, just the adhesion, the water will just start to crawl up your finger, and water moves in these strange, alien ways that you're not used to, because on ground, gravity's always telling it where to go. And then when you let it have a mind of its own, it moves in strange places. And some of the experiments we do, we move water without pumps by just changing the shape of the channel that the water's in, and it will wick its way through a system. And so you try to design a water purification system that has fewer moving parts, so it's more reliable, so that we can go to the moon and Mars and not have to worry about complicated machinery breaking. And so exposing them to that, taking something simple and then talking about that, and then turning the camera and then looking at this complicated piece of machinery and saying, this is what's possible. And then really just letting them know that there's room for you in this, because space is a really hard business and it takes everybody, takes all kinds to do it. And if they're interested, go for it.
Yeah. Hey, do you have advice you'd give to kids in college, high school, as if they want to pursue a career with NASA or in space, or
it's an exciting time. There's lots of things going on. If you just look at the NASA mission, all the things that we're doing as we transition from the International Space Station to commercial low Earth space stations, and that transformation, and how commercial companies are getting involved, and then looking at the moon and all that's required for that. So there's the big rockets that are going to get there, the capsules that are going to get us there. There's landers that have to be developed. There's rovers and new suits. All of this stuff is happening. And so it's a great time, if you're interested in that stuff, to get in. As you start on your path, wherever you're at, understand that it's not going to be easy. If I look back in my career, there are many times where I didn't meet the mark. I failed a test, or I hooked a check ride, or I applied to test pilot school and got rejected, or I applied to NASA and got rejected a couple times. You're going to face adversity along the way. Understand that you're not going to be successful completely on your own, and you've got to be able to reach out and ask for help. And you've got to be willing to give help to your colleagues, be that good teammate, and together you're going to be able to accomplish what you're after.
Tremendous advice. Thank you for that. So this beautiful International Space Station decommissions 2030, I believe. What's the legacy of that machine?
Yeah. There's the thing that is what I'm taking away from my experience up there the most is the international aspect of that. As an operator, more than I think any other position within the human spaceflight program that we have within the nation, as an operator, I get the privilege to go and train. So it takes 2 years to train for a space station mission. And a bulk of that is going to the highest fidelity simulators and equipment so that you can get the best training. And so the International Space Station has Russian modules, and it has Japanese modules, and it has modules from the European Space Agency, as well as the US modules. And so those training facilities exist in Houston, in Tsukuba, Japan, in Cologne, Germany, in Star City, Russia. And so you get to go to those places. And then the people that train you there are the international training team. So I'm being trained by Japanese and German and Italian and Russian trainers, and it's over the course of 2 years. And so you get exposed into their culture and what makes them tick and how they think, and you start to get this appreciation for just, it doesn't matter which center I'm at, these teams of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people are dedicated, their lives are dedicated to making the space station program work. And so it's this unifying, very positive mission of we're going to do research for the benefit of humanity that's able to connect countries across the globe. In spite of whatever's going on the ground, we can come together and do really great things.
Yeah, and what you say is such a thread from back even in the Apollo age of where these photos taken from space and the astronauts talking about no boundaries and they see one Earth, that type of thing, really is a heritage involved in space exploration.
This overview effect is a term that's used for it, and this idea of when you look at the Earth, you see the geological features, you don't see the boundaries. What also frames it is that night sky. So that night sky, you see the air glow of the atmosphere of the Earth, and essentially everything we know that's alive is in that little thin layer over this sphere that's below us. And then the backdrop that you can't capture in video like that is just the sheer vastness of the universe and how many stars, and it clouds up the entire sky. And you understand just how precious our little planet is and how we're really all on it together.
Well, that's fantastic. And I hope you take me next time you go up. I'd like to be part of it.
Deal.
One last question, then we're going to some audience questions. Okay. But General Saltzman will probably want you back in the Space Force sometime soon, or what's the future for you?
Yeah, so you land. I've been focused about on orbit, when you've got this schedule, we've got our daily schedule and there's a red line. And our days are scheduled up there in every 5-minute increment. And so you've got 7 people's schedule, and there's this red line, which is current time, and it's racing along, and you're trying to get everything done before the red line gets to the end of the day. And so you're really focused, it's not even like a 50-meter target. It's like what's right at your nose and just trying to make sure you get that done. Yeah. When you get down, after splashdown, then there's like 2 months. So I can open my horizon a little bit more. 2 months of intense rehabilitation, trying to make sure that you get your body back into shape. And then a lot of debriefs with the program to try to get lessons learned. And then you start, after that, about a 4-month window of being able to go out and share your experiences with the public. And I've opened my aperture to 4 months out at this point. At the end of that, I check in with the chief astronaut and get my marching orders.
See what happens.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for spending a piece of time with us in this discussion. And so we'll move to some audience questions. And what I'd ask you to do is we've got pass around mics, wait for the mic and talk into the mic. And before you ask your question, please give us your name and where you're from. So first question goes to Anchit. Back here, she's with Air and Space Forces magazine.
Good morning, Colonel. Space Forces magazine.
Good
You talked about these fascinating experiments that you've done on ISS, and I'm curious, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from these NASA missions that can be applied to the Space Force going into the future? And also, I'd love to hear what your vision is for the Space Force's future collaboration with NASA, especially when it comes to crewed missions. I don't think the Guardians have ever been to the space before, so.
Yeah, when you think about what NASA needs to do on a daily basis, we're doing operations in space, and the space station is essentially 95% remote controlled. So think of the crew on board is doing only the things that the ground cannot do. So if the ground can figure out a way to do it, they're going to take it away from the crew, and we'll focus on doing other stuff. A great example of that is we used to robotically capture all of the cargo vehicles that came up. And that's because it's a dynamic operation. You're there, it's stick and rudder kind of stuff with a robotic arm. You've got a Greyhound bus out there floating around within 10 meters of the station, and you don't want it to hit, and you reach out and you grab it. Well, now we automatically dock a lot of those cargo vehicles so that the crew doesn't have to do all of that training, doesn't have to do that dynamic operation, and that frees us up so that we can do the things the ground can't do, which sometimes is monotonous. It's moving bags from one place to another and supplies. Sometimes it's just the overhead of having humans on orbit. So a lot of the stuff we do has to do with our regenerative environmental systems, how we process water, how we process urine, how we process the air that we breathe. All of that stuff is because we're up there, and so we're trying to keep ourselves alive. But that operational mindset and the way you approach that problem set is a different environment than what you see on a Space Force ops floor. But you're doing the same thing. You're remotely operating systems. And so one of the things that we work on is how do we collaborate on sharing lessons learned across those environments. And so we're at the beginning stages, and we're fortunate within the Johnson Space Center to have a small footprint of Guardians that are there and are getting checked out on console in mission control to be able to experience and take that experience back to the Space Force and share that and cross-pollinate those ideas. And so I think that's the level of collaboration we're at right now. I'm excited to see that continue to grow, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Right here.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Bressler, and I'm with PW Communications. I'm curious how they control the flow of news and current events when you're in orbit for a few reasons. Obviously, the natural emotion that might come with learning about things that are happening on Earth, and you guys are in a precarious situation. So do they control that? And then obviously the international component of your colleagues, where things happening on the ground might drum up political sentiments. What is the flow of that information? And is there a protocol, or is it just kind of, your wife knows not to mention things? How do they manage that?
In large part, there is no censorship that occurs. I talked about the TDRS system providing us with that 95%, coverage. I'm able to access the internet and stream any news service that I want to up there. That really the only limiting factor is my time. I'm so busy up there, I might miss something that's going on. But there is no intent to shield us from that. That leads to interesting conversations amongst crew members, and that's where those interpersonal skills are really critical. But I'll tell you that the fact that you're up there and your life depends on your crewmates doing things and trusting that they're going to do the right things at the right time, I never question that. And it doesn't matter if it's Sonny or Butch or Don or Alexei or Yvonne or Alex. I mean, they're close friends and colleagues, and I'd trust them with my life.
Yeah. Wow. Well said.
Tobias from the Air and Space Forces magazine.
Thanks, Stutz. So I'm really curious about how we make space exciting for the future generations. I remember whole school assemblies watching launches, Apollo launches, and making models. And Neil Armstrong played a key role in my 7th birthday because he landed on the moon at my party. There was a sense of national purpose, and it was part of the national spirit. And today, most Americans don't even know there's a Space Force. How do we bridge that? And how can the Space Force learn from NASA? Because one thing NASA has done well is be an ambassador for interest in space. How does the Space Force build on that?
A huge part of my job is doing outreach. At the beginning of that 4 months, but even after that 4 months, roughly 10% of a astronaut's time, U.S. astronaut's time, is to do public outreach. And I can tell you that the excitement's there. So it's not how do we get people excited about it. I think it's, to your point, we need to make sure that they're aware of it. It doesn't matter what audience I go to, the questions just start coming out, and the curiosity just starts coming out, and this idea of the potential of space and the things that we could accomplish just naturally starts to come out. And it doesn't matter if it's kindergartners or if it's college students or if it's a group of civic leaders, the excitement's there. So how do you share awareness and bring it into focus? And NASA here in 5 months is getting ready to launch 4 of my friends around the moon. I don't know if it's 5 months, don't quote me on that. But here in the next 12 months for sure, Artemis 2 is going around the moon. And so that's going to be a really big spotlight to bring some of that focus to this idea. But there are so many opportunities out there now, especially in commercial sector, for people to get involved with space. I think it's an obligation that the whole industry needs to take on to just help, bring that awareness out there. The excitement is baked in to society.
Yeah.
So if I could make a quick follow, what could we at AFA or our industry friends and partners do to really make that to make people more conscious? And I mean, really the broader American people more conscious of the Space Force and why space exploration is important. How do we help you?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I think it's going to take some out of the box thinking, and so let's do some real time out of the box thinking. You guys should sponsor a suborbital flight for K through 12 students and have a national competition and draw that spotlight.
But
my personal opinion.
But you want me to go on this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just can't.
You just have to enroll again.
Yeah. So okay. What else? I think please, right here.
Thank you. My name is Mark Lukowski with JSAT International. I'd like to ask you about your personal experience. I don't know, other word, acquisition or acclimation, cultural experience, going from a gravity planet to something the first time they opened the airlock. The experiences that you felt, and whatever you could think of, the impact. I'm thinking like when you first had to dream the first night, was it difficult to sleep? Did you think, do you have a dream, I can't get that pen, it floated away from me? Anything like that you can describe to us? Thank you.
Yeah, so I have dreams that are based in zero G. I have dreams that are based in gravity. I have dreams based on my experiences. When you first get up there, there's so much stuff that's changing. As you're adapting to the zero G environment for the first few days, space motion sickness, space adaptation sickness, essentially your eyes are telling you one thing and your inner ear is telling you something completely different. And it takes a few days before your mind kind of rewires everything and just stops listening to your inner ear. And then everything works out. But there's so much stuff that changes. So the first time I went up there, roughly 45 years old, I figured, hey, I'm over 40, everything's set in stone. It's only downhill from here in terms of me. And the reality is you are so adaptable. Everything changes. I grow. So the gravity's not compressing my spine. So my spine straightens out and decompresses a little bit. And I grew 1.5 inches to 2 inches on orbit. I've rewired the way that I'm perceiving vertical up there by just using visual cues. The other thing that happens is my mental projection of the behavior of everything around me changes. So slowly, after about a month or so, I started expecting things to behave like they're in zero gravity versus 1G. The best example is that subconscious aspect. So if you're going to throw a ball, if I'm going to throw a ball across this room, when I first get to orbit, every time I throw it, I hit the ceiling because I'm playing gravity to pull it back down. After a while, I start throwing it just in a straight line, and I figure that out. And so then subconsciously, I start to pull that in. And then I see the reverse when I land. take off a sweatshirt and I throw it on the bed, all of a sudden it just like slams into the bed like it weighs 300 pounds. And it's because I kind of expected it to float a little bit more. Your skin changes. So calluses on your feet. I floated for 7 months or 6 months. And so I wasn't using the bottoms of my feet. And so those calluses just slowly fluff off. And they get caught by the air conditioning system and filters. So you don't have to worry about all that. But parts of space are not so clean. But what I did use my feet for was to hold me in place. And the way I do that is there's handrails all over the place. And so I hook my foot underneath a handrail and I lift my big toe. And so slowly I migrated the calluses from the bottom of my feet to the top of my big toe because that's the skin that I was using. Everything changes when my immune system changes. If you cut yourself, it doesn't heal as quickly. Hair tends to grow faster. Nails tend to grow faster. All of this stuff changes. And then it goes back when you get back to the ground. And so the lesson that it taught me is all the little micro decisions that we make on a daily basis that expose us to the environments around us shape who we are. We're always adapting to what we are subjected to. But that's one of the thrills.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it's painful. Growing, stretching the spine was fairly, intense back pain for about a week and a half before it subsided. So it's not all fun and games, but it teaches you a little bit about yourself and about humanity.
It's very good. We have one last question right here, and then we'll be out of time.
My name's Mike. I'm a tax preparer and a lifelong space enthusiast. My question is, what do you think is ultimately more important, the research performed aboard the International Space Station or the technological spinoff that comes from building the infrastructure of having manned spaceflight in low Earth orbit?
I'm not sure in my mind I separate the two. I look at it as this objective of trying to gain knowledge about ourselves, knowledge about our universe, and how we interact with it. And some of that is the exploration aspect, where we're pushing the boundaries further and going to places we haven't been before. But I'm doing the same thing inside a laboratory. I'm pushing the boundary of what we know, trying things we haven't done before, and seeing what works and what doesn't. I'm fundamentally, when I talk to elementary students, the most powerful question is why? Why does something happen? Why does it, and just keep asking why. And you'll get some answers, and then that'll lead to more questions, and that propels us forward. So it's the pursuit of knowledge in my mind. I don't really separate the two out.
I got to say, this has been a tremendous discussion, but we have to bring it to an end, unfortunately. Boy, thank you for spending this precious time. Thanks for your service in the defense of the nation, and also for your service to all of us on this planet. It's been a tremendous.
Thank you.
I've got a
little gift.
Okay.
I told you I was able to take a few things up, so I wanted to share one of those things with you. So to the Air and Space Force Association, a Space Force flag that flew with me on the International Space Station.
Outstanding. Thank you. Round of applause. Well, good luck to you. We hope to have you back sometime.
Absolutely.
And everybody, don't forget, we've got his coveralls out there on display. And that's it for today. Thanks for this Warriors in Action, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
That was outstanding.
I enjoyed it.